A few months ago, I found out that I became a chartered accountant here in the UK, sitting all my ACA exams, passing them all first time, and achieving scores as high as 98%. Now, I'm not saying this to try and brag, even though it does sound like that, but I was never really the most academic person growing up, and I dropped AS level maths because I found it too difficult. And then I went on to do these accounting exams and do pretty well in them. So these are just going to be a few tips that I'd have for anyone recently starting the ACA qualification, or perhaps you are halfway through and you just want a few more exam tips to help you get to the next level. This is kind of what I wish I had a few years ago when I was just getting started. So without further ado, let's just dive into the first tip. I want to talk about something called just in case learning versus just in time learning. So a lot of people with these exams will spend a lot of time watching the videos, watching the content and rewatching it over and over again. At least I know I did in the beginning, thinking that the more times I watch this content or the more questions in a book that I read, the more of the textbook I get through, the better it's going to stick in my head. But I promise you, it doesn't really work like that with these exams. These exams are so focused on the questions and your ability to answer them correctly that the majority of your learning should go towards actually practicing the questions, diving into the question bank, trying things out, failing, trying again, failing again, and adopting the just-in-time learning methods. So as opposed to watching the content, trying to get through everything, I'd recommend watching a bit of the content, trying a few questions, seeing how you fare, marking them. If you get it wrong, go back to that subject matter and try and learn it a bit more. Go back to the question bank, try a few more questions. You see the idea. So rather than just overloading your brain with so much information and so much course material up front, you're doing it bit by bit. You're reading a bit of the book or you're watching a lecture, you're practicing a few questions, seeing if you actually understand the concept, and only then are you moving on. Really, it's what worked for me in the latter sort of half of my exams when I got to the sort of late stage of the professional or advanced level. And it got me pretty good scores in these exams. So would highly recommend that form of revision if you are struggling to know what to do in your revision sessions. Next up, I strongly recommend you to identify your focus hours and to understand flow states. So maybe this sounds a bit wishy-washy to you, and I'm sure if you spoke to me a few years ago, I would have said the same. But really, a large part of passing these exams, when you work a busy full-time job like I did, is to understand that you need to find the times of day where you are just most productive. Now, most people either identify as a night owl or an early bird. And I really think there's something to it there, because trying to do anything for me after work, like, it's just not happening. You know, I can't sit after about 7 o'clock and do any studying. You know, I just want to sit and watch Netflix and relax. But speak to me at 6 a.m. in the morning and my mind is just so sharp. I can just sit there. I can get through what I need to do. I can smash out an hour and a half, however long I've got in the morning to study before going to work. So I'd really recommend you to identify the times of day where you are just most productive and to really optimize your studying around that. Because as I say, there's no point beating a dead horse. You don't want to be cramming your brain with more information and trying to study when you know you're just not going to be productive. Like, there's literally no point. You are better off just relaxing and resting at those points. Now, deep work versus shallow work, kind of just what we touched on, but deep work is when you're just most focused and most productive. And I find myself getting into deep work with some binaural beats. So find a good playlist on YouTube or use Headspace if you have that app to get a good focus playlist on with some headphones. Eliminate all distractions, so no phone on your desk, one tab open at a time, and know exactly what you are going to do when you are going into your study session, so you aren't just flicking between pages of the book or different lectures and trying to sort of make things up on the spot. You need to go into each session knowing exactly what you are going to do, what the outcome of that session is going to be, and how you know it's going to be a good session. So really think strategically and practical about it rather than just trying to cram your brain with as much as you can whenever you get a spare minute. So my third tip is to sit strategically. Now, I appreciate a lot of firms have quite a rigid exam structure and they don't allow for this. But if you do have the luxury of dictating your schedule and picking exams when they suit you, I'd strongly recommend following this, which I'll put up on the screen now. Give it a screenshot if you want to. But it just details the recommended order that I would sit the exams in if I was to go right back to the start and get the option to sit them all over again. So quick tip there, but exams feed into each other. Content in one often crosses with content in another. So I strongly recommend you make the most of that if you can. Now, tip 4 is own figure marks. So I feel like a lot of people get so consumed in trying to get the right answer in these exams that they forget that the majority of the marks are there in the workings. Now, it doesn't really matter if you don't get the exact right numbers in these workings or in these questions, or whatever. What matters is your ability to methodically work through what you are doing and show the examiner that you understand what it is you are talking about. Because it would be quite cruel to penalize someone over and over again in a question if they just make one small mistake right at the beginning. You know, maybe they depreciate something wrong or they use a wrong tax rule and it just results in a ever so slightly wrong answer. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. All you need to do is show the examiner that you can work methodically through a question, you can justify why you're doing something, and you can link it back to the question and show you how you got there in your answer. I really think there is a lot more marks in that than there is in trying to get to the exact right answer. And I'd really recommend more time trying to show what it is you are doing and really focus on getting the workings down to the T and getting them in your answer. My last tip is to actually finish the exams. So it kind of touches on what we just spoke about, but I really think that the people that finish these exams are so much more likely to pass them. I'm sure there are statistics around the pass rates of people that complete the exams and those that don't. There are so many easy marks to get in a lot of these exams that are only available if you actually give a question a go. Even if you don't get the right answer, if you're sort of on the right lines, they're going to give you credit. So strongly recommend you make the most of that if you can. And that's it, guys. So 5 quick fire tips right there. I hope that was helpful and I'll see you in the next video.